2NURFM 103.7. Time to welcome into the studio our Professor of Education from the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti, who, looking $1 million, putting my $10 T-shirt to shame, mate. You have to stop doing that.
That's okay. We'll try again next time, Mark. Good morning.
We do. By the way, also welcome back from your trip overseas. You've been back home and carved your way back across the United States. You eventually got back here?
Fantastic visit. Our family's doing well. A little chaotic there. That's for another bit or another episode, I think. But it was a wonderful visit. Get out and live our lives is my message.
Absolutely. Fair call on that. Now, there are some calls. We saw this in the Premier about a week or so ago, the idea of changing up school hours. This is something that they're looking at trialling. The 9 to 3 or 9 to 3:30, yeah. He's looking at that. Hey, that's what we set up in the 50s, different time, different world. Let's have a look at the implications of what they're looking to trial and how that's going to play out in the real world, John.
Well, we don't want to cause any accidents from a mum driving back from dropping their kids off at school. No. This is like radical stuff out here. But the Premier is actually mirroring a trend around the world to look at school hours. The 9 to 3-ish time frame actually controls our lives. Even if you don't have kids in school, you know when traffic is or isn't. You know when school holidays or aren't. You know when the lights are flashing to go 40 or less or you get a ticket. But more than that...
I really do, because I finish here at 3:30 in the afternoon. So, hack my way through the school zones.
Yeah, it can be an extra 20 minutes getting home. But the reality is there any educational reason why the school day is what it is, or could it be different? The Premier has a pilot with about 12 schools around the state that's looking at different structures of hours. And there's some promise to this, but I believe they have to go slow because all of everything we do involving children is dependent on the structure we assume of the 9 to 3 day.
Well, we've seen over the last couple of years when we make changes in one area, it plays out across every other area. So when we're looking at school, this is something that, if it rolls out, would ultimately be a permanent thing, you would think, if they make the change. This may be an issue for people that have those regular hours.
Yes.
Plus, if you're not working the 9 to 5, you may be looking forward to this.
The premise comes from that many schools have added before school and after school the care that gives students extra academic, but mostly social or physical activity. So whether that's preschool and after school care, and a lot of parents are paying big bucks for that. What if that was wrapped into the school day? Because a mom who's a nurse that has to be to work at 7:30, getting someone to get the kids there and make sure they're safe, by 9 is an ask in the morning. Just like is if you're leaving your teenager at home alone to get up out of bed to get to school if it happened to go later. Biologically, young people, that'd be the early primary and early childhood kids, are wired to be ready to roll by 6:30. I mean, they are up and they're ready to do all their cognitive activity. So 7 or 7:30 start around the world is not uncommon. Likewise, teenagers are wired to be a little sleepy, not just because they stay up later, just biologically as their bodies are changing. So schools that start around 9 or earlier are really too early. Actually, teenagers don't start their days in their brains till about 11 anyway. So you'll see around the world all this choice, but how do you standardize that? What does that mean for after-school work, sporting activities, all the clubs, all of the related jobs that are affected by this? I think there's a couple of examples that people might be interested in exploring, and I would suggest to an interested mom or dad out there who is interested in this, work with your school on trialing and discussing the possibilities. There's some schools around the world in impoverished areas that have gone to a 4-day school week.
Now, there's a thought. Now, that's something that hasn't been thrown into the mix yet, John.
And what that allows is for teachers who get burned out working with very challenging situations, really get the Monday off, but kids go to the school. They do their related activities, their sporting activities, swimming carnivals, other things that are not necessarily academic. So the kids have care, but the teachers work Tuesday to Friday, and they're cooking with gas on the academics then. It prevents teacher burnout, lots of satisfaction, and there are some families whose parents have arranged a 4-day week because they're working extra hours during the day to make up for that. That's something that's worth exploring. Again, kind of radical, but interesting. Others have staggered primary school starts to be earlier, secondary school starts to be later. It affects buses. It affects everything we talked about. I'm really excited we have the conversation, but I know it'll create panic almost in everybody's mind because our whole society is wired, assuming 9 to 3.
Again, you've mentioned a lot of the academic implications of, and I'm thinking on this, maybe if you had the infants and primary school, they do earlier, and high school, they sort of start later. But again, that's a whole other conversation. Again, there are those full societal playouts of this, because if you're in a small town where there's maybe one or two schools, it makes no difference traffic-wise, of course. But if you imagine bigger centres like Newcastle, Maitland, and certainly Sydney, having school hours be all over the place,
Definitely.
There's that bigger rollout for the rest of society.
Well, and if your primary school is on a different schedule than your secondary, because you have kids in both, it can really make and rock the world of our families. I think the goal here is, why is it the way it is, and is there a possibility of changing it? I would get in with your parent council. I would have the conversations just to see, is the schedule we're working with ideal for our kids? And you'll probably see this be a fruit salad of choice coming up in the next few years, where school starts might be one of the features that schools advertise. So you'll choose a school because it has an earlier start, or they wrap around that preschool and after school care, and another school more standard. It could be one of those things in the menu, because there's lots of choice in the Hunter right now. That is something schools brand themselves around.
Could we end up having a scenario where if we build in a lot of that extra before and after school care, where we end up just having kids spending a lot more time at school because mum and dad have their work and all of that?
And the pros and cons coming out of Asia are that if it's all academic, we lose being a kid. But many families have already chosen that, and it's costing them big bucks to run that pre and post. What if that was wrapped into school day and came with the price of your taxes? So there'd be some advantage for families who just can't swing it. You run your small business, you got to be ready to open the shop. You need that school to be open. Possibly those will be the families that won't be as upset. But Mark, the reason to talk about this today is get in early with your school, with your principal, with your council, have a conversation. Could even be there's some grant money to pilot this. And then when we do make a decision, it won't be as controversial because we've had some chance to give input.
All right, we will be hearing a lot more in this space on the potential of changing some of those school hours out of the 9 to 9:30. Professor John Fischetti, University of Newcastle, as always, mate, thank you for your time. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks from here.
Have a great day.
2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.